Today is chapter 5, and this will be the last chapter for the first exam, so just gotta hang in there tough to make it to that first exam. Let's see how that goes. And this is really the first real meat of A&P 1 beyond just the basic information that we've covered in chapters 2, 3, and 4. And so the 4 types of tissues are what we're going to cover today, and you can see them delineated here. The first type we will cover is epithelial tissue, but I should define tissues. I'm being a little jumping the game here. And so you can see in this figure on the right side of the screen that the cells and the fluids that surround them combine to form tissue. So tissues are cells that have specific functions and generally cohesive functions, interactive functions with each other. And the 4 types of tissues are epithelia, connective, muscular, and nervous system. Now, epithelial tissue, just a little bit of overview of each of these 4 types, are that they cover any surface, and they also line any particular passageway or duct or tube within the human body. Also, glands, all the glands in your body are formed from epithelial tissue. Connective tissue is just like the name sounds, perfect name. It fills all the internal spaces, it positions organs, it protects organs. So all these different types of connective tissue we're going to cover have quite widespread effects and actions. Muscle tissue is all about contraction. We're not actually going to cover it here in this chapter. I just want to mention it because it is one of the 4 tissues. We'll be dealing with it a lot more when we hit chapter 11. And then the last of the 4 is nervous tissue. Once again, we're not going to cover it here in this chapter to any extent other than now, and we will address it much more fully in chapter 12. But nervous tissue or neural tissue is what is responsible for electrical conduction about the body. So that's a nice little intro. And so epithelial tissue that either faces the bodily fluid or the external environment. And what are its functions? Its functions are, of course, first and foremost, protect. Skin is epithelial tissue. So when you start to think about functions of epithelia, think about what the skin does. It protects. Barrier provides a barrier. We go swimming, the last thing we want is our body to be allowing, the water in the ocean or water in a pool to be entering your own body. So it forms a nice waterproofing seal. Also line the blood vessels, so the blood vessels don't allow substances to leak in and out other than through transport proteins. Secretion, we're going to see, of course, the role here is glands. Glands certainly secrete different materials throughout the body. Absorption, so epithelial tissue, perhaps say in the kidneys, certainly going to be profound in the absorptive processes, also the digestive system, right? And then finally, they permit the passage of substances, and we're going to see how that works, particularly in, say, in the brain area. We have an area called the blood-brain barrier, and we'll see how epithelia function there to protect the brain and other tissues that are inside that barrier. Now, the characteristics of epithelia, there's 5 of them, and the first is that they are display what is called cellularity. And so what this means is that there is very little intervening material between the cells. They're pretty much right up against each other, and they're held together by cell proteins, by junctions. So we're going to see this, especially when we hit the cell junctions video. Polarity means that they exhibit the fact that there are organelles in these cells, and the organelles are mainly in the lower half of these cells. Remember, these cells are lining something. So on one surface is going to be the skin, but on the outer surface there's nothing. So on the inner half, if you will, the deeper half of the epithelial cell, they will have a much larger congregation of organelles than on the external half. There are surfaces associated with each of these cells in terms of polarity. We have the outer surface that faces the outside, that faces the opening in the tube, and that's called the apical surface. And then we have the basal surface, is where the epithelial cell is attaching to the body. And then the sides are called lateral surfaces. Now, the basal surface attaches to the rest of the body via what is called a basement membrane. This basement membrane is kind of half epithelial tissue product and half connective tissue product. It really has no exceptional function associated with it, except for providing a way for epithelial cells to anchor to the body. So all epithelial tissue interfaces with the basement membrane. What few exceptions there are, we'll be sure to specifically mention those. So as that kind of relates to the attachment aspect here, and this is the notion that the basal layer is attached to the basement membrane. One note here is that the basement membrane is also known as the basal lamina. Now, epithelial tissue is also avascular, which means it has no blood vessels that directly penetrate into its areas. And we'll discuss why. Most of the reason is because of the basement membrane. It is a solid block to blood vessels penetrating from the lower regions or the deeper regions of the connective tissue that lie beneath the basement membrane. So it can't penetrate through there, so that prevents blood vessels from entering into the epithelial layer. Finally, especially in regards to skin and other epithelial tissues that have multiple layers of cells, we're going to see that typically the bottom layer of cells is full of stem cells that rapidly divide and continue to produce new cells for the layers that lie above. So here is a picture showing you the aspects of an epithelial cell. You'll see sometimes they're ciliated, sometimes they're not. You'll notice that most of the organelles are down in the lower portions of the epithelial cells. You see the location of the basal lamina or the basement membrane, and we see the notion that the outer portion is the apical layer. The layer near the basal lamina or the basement membrane is the basal layer. So just want to point it out, I want to emphasize with it, this is the hallmark of all epithelial tissue, the presence of a basement membrane.